All right, we have experts in music publishing up here. So let's see. We just had a great talk with Larry Mestel. Let's start with the position of the songwriter. I feel like the position of the songwriter is really evolving from what it used to be till today in many, many different ways. So I'm just going to throw it open to you guys. Please, just jump right in. How do you feel about the position of the songwriter in these days, and how has it changed?
I'm happy to jump with that. Look, I've been in music publishing for over 30 years. The songwriter is the beating heart of the music business. If you don't have a song, you don't have a record. It's as simple as that. And I think in the past, the industry has not necessarily recognized the value of the songwriter as much as it should have been. Certainly economically, it's not recognized on a par with recording artists, and that's maybe a discussion for another time.
Right. We can discuss it now.
Well, it certainly should be much more on a par, in my view. But without a song, you don't have a record. It's as simple as that. And so, due recognition for the songwriter is well overdue.
I would definitely double down on that. So what I look at is really the music creation process. What used to be linear and sequential, you have a song, you pass it for a publisher, it cuts into an album, you put someone to sing it, and then you market it. That used to be one flow chart. But right now it's more like a circular economy, if you will, where, the tail can be the end, and, the head can be the tail, and the tail can be the head as well. And it goes in the circle, sometimes in reverse. So we have songwriters that are also able to connect with their fans through different kinds of collaborations and also different kinds of platforms that I'm sure David will be mentioning about. So it is going to be very important that we give credit where credit is due, because what do you remember from your childhood? What do you remember from the heartbreak? You remember that song. Every ex that I have a song, and it is always going to be the lyrics when you like, amen, that's why I cry. And that is what the strength of a music is about. It is about the song. And I think it's going to give credit where credit is due, because the magic is starting with the song and it lies with the songwriter. And then now they're able to connect with their fans and also participate in more ways in the economy in a circular manner. I would say it's good for everybody. So I am really happy about that.
Yeah, I was almost a little confused when I first saw that question, because for me, my whole professional career has been working around songwriters, and they're always at the front and centre. They are. Without the song, there's nothing. I would add one thing to what you guys have said, which is I think the people that are representing songwriters have become much more sophisticated and better at placing songwriters in, right in the middle of the creativity and the economic outcomes. It's got a long way to go, I appreciate that, but I think that's a big part of the step in the right direction too.
I think that's a really good point, and Larry referenced it as well. Publishers, good publishers need, absolutely.
Take a bow.
Good publishers need to be marketing. In the old days, publishers had a collection mentality, and good publishers now understand that, their job is marketing, working with DSPs, working with social platforms, obviously doing sync and, working with gaming companies, fitness, wellness, all that stuff. And there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of the groundwork at the coalface is done by publishers. So good publishers are doing that work. And the line between, the publishing and the recording functions is definitely blurred.
Yeah. Yeah.
On behalf of the good publisher,
I was referring to you.
On behalf of the good publishers, for our company, Warner Chappell, we see ourselves as the agent of change as well. So the business rules might have changed, but what did not change is it is still about music. It is still about the song. It is still about the music creation process. And true, we have to change the way we do business as the business has changed. So I think, that is definitely survival for the future. That's something that we are doing, and that's something that we'll continue doing.
Right.
I would just add one more, and you see songwriters working with managers as well these days, right? That 25 years ago, that was not happening.
Right, exactly.
And that's, so it's that level of sophistication, right. It's that really, thinking about it.
So I'm going to push you a little, David, because you said the songwriters have always been front and center, and in your, role, sure, but for the public, not. this is a very sophisticated crowd here. We have music industry people, but how many of the general public know that, Taylor Swift songs, a lot of their hits have been written by Max Martin? He is actually an exception, so people maybe do know him, but most songwriters are actually unknown, even the ones who are really successful. Maybe not Max Martin, but do you think that it would be a good thing if the songwriters become, let's say, as famous or nearly as famous as the artist? Would that be a good thing?
I mean, that's kind of a recent change anyway, right?
Yes.
You got your LP, you pulled out the liner notes, you had all of that information there. After the time the lyrics were printed, you knew who the songwriters were. Should that come back? Yeah, 100%.
Well, I don't think that people paid attention to who the songwriters were in the past, especially if they were different than the artist who was putting out the album.
I think there's a more fundamental problem of recognition. And this definitely applies in the general public, but it also applies in our industry, which is that a lot of people don't understand that when you're listening to music on, say, Spotify or YouTube, you're listening to two copyrights. There's the song that maybe Arica and I wrote together and own 50-50, and then there's the recording of that song that David's band did. People don't understand that very simple distinction, so they're not thinking about the songwriter. They're thinking about David's band.
That's right. They're not making a division
between
the recording of the song, which is, of course, the master recording, and the publishing, the songwriting. Right.
Absolutely.
Nobody's thinking about my band.
Yeah. Hey.
Because it's all about the lyrics and
Absolutely.
the composition.
It's all about the song, mate.
So, I mean, I hope I'm not pushing this too far, but it's really fascinating to me. So, the direction that we're moving is for people to get that recognition. I mean, they may not know the legality of it, but to understand that somebody wrote the song who wasn't the same person who performed the song, that's coming to the fore. And I think, to a certain extent, songwriters are going to become, the stars, the celebrities that people recognize. And I guess that's a good thing. I wonder if
definitely a good thing.
Is there any downside to that?
I don't see it. I mean, for example, on the streaming platforms, you're starting to see, lyrics popping up. You're starting to get credits for songwriters. So consumers are starting to see that there is a songwriter behind that band or that artist. So I think that recognition is starting, but it's definitely got a long way to go. I don't see the downside of it. From a songwriting point of view. Honestly, if I was musically inclined, I'd want to be a songwriter, not an artist, because I can work for 50 years and continue to write songs for other artists until the day I pop off this mortal coil.
Yeah.
An artist has a relatively short, sort of time span. So,
unless you're the Rolling Stones.
Unless you're the Rolling Stones. Yeah.
Right, sure. Any other opinions on that one? Or
I would say it's not just about the recognition, just to call out the elephant in the room, it's also about the money. So recognition come with it, but they should be compensated for the talent and for the music they put to the world. So we are very passionate making sure that the songwriters are paid fairly and also ASAP. And I think, the world is now evolving in such a way that we are talking about it, right? We are now talking about what is the economy of a song, what is the economy of a songwriter. So I think it has to be hand in hand. No good just giving you a light and a heart, but end of the day, they need to be paid for their talent as well. So I think, it's two things at the same time. But sometimes I also wonder out loud whether we are putting too many labels, because the world is coming into an intersectionality. It is tend to be two separate spheres in the past, right? You sing, I write. But then again, aren't we coming into a Venn diagram where it's just overlapping in the middle? Mm-hmm. And now we are talking about intersectionality. Taylor Swift writes, she sings, she's market, she's a business entrepreneur as well, and the same thing as well. So a single songwriter who used to be more comfortable in the back room in the studio can now also put their craft and connection to the fans via different kind of medium. So I don't think it's that separate a sphere that don't overlap. So too much labels maybe, not the music label, but labels. Too many labels maybe, but we should just look at the talent. Talent needs to be heard, and talent needs to be recognized, and talent needs to be paid.
Sure. I'm going to take off from what you started with and what you ended with, the songwriter getting paid. So obviously we have a completely new environment. I mean, it's been this way for a few years, digital environment. Do you think that the songwriter, i.e. the collection on music publishing, is sufficient? And do we need to work on that? How is that landscape? This is a question for everybody. By the way.
I would say that is actually the equation of two things. One, is it sufficient? Two, is it fast enough, right? You can promise me the world, but it's going to come a decade later. It probably doesn't makes a lot of sense. I take more issues with the speed of the collection because for Warner Chappell, we are very passionate making sure that we pay our songwriters ASAP as we can when we receive it. But when do we receive it? And I think the world today is still moving very slowly.
Right.
It is still an issue. It's moving faster than before, but not fast enough. And maybe on that note, someone else will answer that.
I mean, I agree with you. It is too slow, and to me, that all comes back to the data, right? The quality of the data, and you can get songs that are written and they don't get registered with a publisher, with the collecting society, with the licensing vehicle for 12 to 18 months after release.
That's way too slow. Yeah.
It's way too slow. So they've, and there's things that are happening around that. Bjorn Ulvaeus, who's now head of CZAC, and obviously a little known band back in the 70s called ABBA, working on things called Credits Due, which aims to get everyone that walks into the songwriting room, into the recording studio,
Right.
get them listed, get them get the splits up front, get it out the door. Once that data is better and faster, it flows because the services are ready to send it out. We don't want it. We don't want to hold it. We want to get it out.
Right. Nothing to add, David?
There's plenty to add. Firstly, I think there's a practical issue with what Bjorn's trying to do. I understand the rationale of it, and it'd be in an ideal world, those splits are agreed in the studio. Paperwork's done, and it all happens before the song's released. The reality is that those guys are in the studio. They're making music. They're not thinking about the splits, and it's got to be out tomorrow. And it becomes an afterthought. The lawyers get involved. The managers get involved. It's suddenly a bit of a bun fight, and you end up with that problem that you're talking about. Doesn't mean it has to happen that way, but it often does happen that way.
Yeah, that's fair. It certainly does, but I think you could solve a lot of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And no, you're right. In theory, it should be much faster. I think there are other issues around data that we don't need to go too deeply in because it'll send the audience to sleep. Links between recordings and publishing data. Consistency of spelling.
Right, metadata.
Different languages. When you're trying to sell, for example, Chinese music into Western markets, is it in English metadata or Chinese, simplified, traditional? How does all that work?
That's certainly a difficulty.
Well, it's a big problem because if you've got, for example, Chinese repertoire being sold in the US, nobody at ASCAP or BMI are going to be able to read that metadata. So you need to work out a way that.
I mean,
which, of course, the Koreans have got their heads around.
That's an overarching problem. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of layers around data, and there's still a long way to go. We're definitely better than we were 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It gets better all the time, but we're still a long way from what should be a fairly smooth process.
Right. And I think we have songwriters and musicians in the audience, so I think it's worth noting that whatever you release, I mean, obviously it's going to be released digitally, you have to have your metadata in proper order. I mean, it seems, I think for you guys, you think it doesn't need to be said, but it needs to be said over
I would say it even more bluntly. I would say to the songwriters and musicians in the room, make sure that you take responsibility for it as soon as you can, as early as you can.
Immediately.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't rely on other people to do it.
Absolutely. And it should be noted that metadata literally equals getting paid.
Absolutely.
Without the metadata, you're not going to get paid. And, with it, hopefully you'll get paid, as we just discussed.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. This is a question that we just addressed a little bit with Larry, but a lot of capital, flowing into publishing catalogs recently. How do you guys think this has affected the publishing landscape? Good for songwriters, bad for songwriters, both good and bad. I think it's also a complex issue, but I'm really interested to hear your opinions on this one.
You want me to take it? Okay.
Well, everyone
You're the acquirer.
Look, I think there's a really significant difference between financial capital and creative capital. So there is a lot of capital out there that just wants to buy music assets. By the way, in the music industry forever, we've always acquired assets. When I was at BMG, we acquired catalogs. When I was at Universal, we acquired other recording companies. It's been happening forever. It's the cycle of the business.
Yeah.
But just putting that aside for a second, financial institutions that just want to, invest in music, that's a completely different thing to, and without trying to sell ourselves, for a company like Primary Wave, where it's about adding value and
Right.
marketing those assets. Those are two very different things.
Right.
So there's a lot of capital out there that's what I would call passive. It just wants to invest in the asset class. Personally, I think that's, I wouldn't call it a waste of time, but it's definitely not optimal. If you're investing in music, whether you're a music company or just an investor, you should be working that music, working the assets, marketing, being creative, finding ways to increase the revenue as much as you possibly can.
Right. Right.
Internally, we have a saying that anyone can buy a garden, but not anyone can grow the garden. Right. So, and I think it really spells out what the priority is. Are you a songwriter or catalog owner that is looking into short-term value extraction, but it might produce diminishing returns over years because there is no one actively marketing it, no one sitting down with you and talking about where your career is coming or going to, and no one to put you to collaborate with other people so that you can have another hit song. So it's about growing the garden as well. And I think it has to go into the creative capital that we talk about. It is not just about the money. But there could be people who need the money and then into the value extraction. So I can't say all songwriters are the same. But based on the songwriters that we collaborate with, everyone wants to be in this business and continue to be creative in a productive way forever and ever.
Yeah.
So the line doesn't stop in value extraction. So I would say it has to go hand in hand with the financial capital and the creative capital because you need to grow the garden. So we are aligned.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And, there is also a difference between a new songwriter, a young songwriter, and someone that's been around
Sure.
20 or 30 years.
As a big catalog, yeah.
Right, a legacy songwriter who has paid his or her dues and, that investment, that partnership around their catalog could be transformative for them.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. If it makes sense, then
Sure.
that's a great thing. And as Larry was saying, when you partner with that type of fantastic legacy artist, it's very, very powerful. Now, it may or may not be the right thing to do when you're just starting out. It's as Arica said, there's a different framework at play. But at the legacy end of the business, it can be very transformative.
Right.
Generally speaking, I think it's been positive because it gets it into the press. A lot more headlines about songwriting and that part of the industry in the last few years than we've seen before. From a platform perspective, we're pretty agnostic about it at the moment. Most of the acquisitions, they're still going through the traditional kind of administrative partners, so nothing's really changing. What's going to be interesting is if they start to really turn the screws on that, the value extraction that you were kind of talking about, and start, withdrawing those rights and, aiming to do direct deals. And that could, reshape the framework significantly because there's some pretty big catalogues that are being purchased.
Right. Oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah. Great. Let's move on to songwriting itself in terms of I think it's evolving, that there's a lot more collaboration, there's a lot more songwriting camps, that sort of thing going on. I wonder how you guys feel about that. I mean, well, you can tell me. How do you feel about the collaborations and songwriting camps and all of those things that are happening now?
Well, I'm a believer in that. First and foremost, we all know that music is going international. So it is no secret that now we are listening to music. We were just talking about it, you know, being written in Scandinavia. And then Latin music came and stuck and never gone away. K-pop, everyone now has a favorite K-pop artist. So the world is now coming together where there's really no borders. And how do you bring the people together? It's only when you bring them together physically or remotely in a form of a collaboration mode. We call them the song camps. So this is something that we do all the time. We put artist A, writer B, C, and I put them together in a room and they write magical music out of it. As we speak right now, we have song camps around the world, in Hong Kong, in Malaysia, in Europe, and so on. We do have a flagship song camp that is happening every single year in Vegas, where we have over like 200 writers joining us. And that could be a world where maybe we will have a collaboration in Asia, and then we could do that here so that we can have the East meets West or all kinds of cultural, melting pot. That would be the dream come true. So, if you ask me, I love it. It works. I've been there. I'm like, wow, this is where the magic happens. So I welcome you. If you're interested in a campaign like that, call out to me and my team. We can talk offline about it.
Great.
Yeah.
I want to double down on something you said early in the piece, which was connecting artists and songwriters. It's got to be about targeted outcomes. It can't just be for the sake of getting people together to write. And back to your first question around, more economic interest and, commercial interest from songwriters. It's got to be looking at targeted outcomes. You've got to anchor it around an artist. You've got to get songwriters in the room. It doesn't have to be necessarily fully curated songwriters, but, because there's a real, there's a beauty in, very different styles coming together, but it has to be targeted to outcomes and to releases and getting those cuts.
I think that's a good point. Firstly, songwriting camps, fantastic, really good. Sometimes a little hit and miss, but that's not the point. The point is just getting people together.
Right.
Collaboration, I think that's the word you used, or maybe Arica you used.
Sure, I think I used that word.
That's key, and often songwriters do work together, or sometimes work alone, but very often there's collaboration going on in songwriting. Just to give you a practical example, so as Larry mentioned, our partnership with Times Music in India. So part of the strategic vision for that deal is taking Indian music into the international market.
Well, yeah.
Right? So you don't just do that. It doesn't just happen.
Right.
There's a collaborative process that we are working on actively, literally from the day after we close the deal, between our teams in the US, our A&R teams, our marketing teams, our sync teams, our creative teams, and the teams in India. And you're trying to build bridges between two disparate cultures, right? You're trying to get Indian music into not only the diaspora in North America, but also further out, which of course the Koreans have been successful in doing, going beyond the Korean diaspora. And so you're building bridges through collaboration at lots of different levels, internal and external, to make those collaborations work, because they don't just come out of thin air.
Right.
You have to work them, and they don't all work. You're going to try and fail, and then you'll find the right magic, as you said, that is happening in the room. Better face-to-face than remote, but it does happen remotely. It can work, but you've got to build collaboration.
Yeah.
It's a process that you have to be really diligent with.
Right.
I'm 150% behind the idea that it has to be very targeted. So sometimes we have to look behind what is the music. For instance, if we do a metal pop, it doesn't really matter where the person is based in. It can be any Chinese descendant. It can be a person based in Beijing, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia. And then they all sit together and create a Mandarin pop song, because that's where it cuts across. And K-pop, we have a lot of collaboration with the US as well. So there is actually a lot of music that the underlying tone is actually very similar. We are now looking into collaboration of Afrobeats into Asia because there are some parts of that legacy in Indonesia, in Malaysia, where Afrobeats fits really nicely into it. So a song camp doesn't have to be that it's a very top A-list with an A-list, because sometimes you can create wonders just by putting things that are different together. But being targeted also means that we don't just work within the music industry ourselves, we also work with brand partners. So if you want an OST, you want a BGM for your Sing campaign, we can write a bespoke song for you. So those are the kind of efforts that we put into to monetize and, to bring the monetization and benefits to our songwriters. So
I think you make a great point, because it's not just about pop music. There's other levels.
As long as they
absolutely
cross over.
So, for example, in India is the home of wellness and devotional music.
Sure.
Right? So there's this connectivity in the wellness market between India and the rest of the world, and they're bridges that we're also trying to build. So it doesn't have to be at a pop level, but at a pop level, there's hip-hop producers in the US who are thinking, Indian sounds, that's cool. We haven't done that before. Let's get some stems across and start working Indian sounds in the hip-hop community.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different levels that the collaboration can work.
Sure.
And it's all happening behind the scenes. You don't hear about it until it's on YouTube.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes it's about the shared experience as well, right? Like we run a Black Voices Fund, and that's across the US, Australia, UK, Sub-Saharan Africa, LATAM. And part of that is we put songwriting camps together. So we've had collaborations between artists in Australia and the US and Kenya and London.
Yeah.
And
It's fantastic.
And it's amazing, right?
Yeah. But I do want to push this a little further, because I feel there's a tension between the two things that you said. Targeted outcome. The songwriting camps are very general. You just talked about broad territories. I mean, what do you mean by targeted outcome? You're trying to write a specific type of song, or what exactly do you mean by targeted outcome when you're putting two songwriters together to collaborate?
No, what I mean by that is you've got to be working with an artist, not just putting two songwriters together. Working with an artist who is looking to have a release and build cuts around that. That's my view. I can
chime in. I can chime in on that. So on the practical front, usually I think what David is referring to is we do get briefs from the music labels or from an A&R or anyone who needs music. So it can be very prescriptive. It's not just about genre. It can be, at which minute do you want the beat to drop? At which minute do you want the hook to come in? It can be very prescriptive, but it can be very general. But what it is you don't write with just an open brief. It's just a targeted one of who you're writing for, what kind of genre, and then, it could be for a specific artist as well. A lot of the music for the OST, the original soundtrack, is actually from a brief. It has to be from the brief. So if you have a movie, and then typically you will come to us and we will say, yeah, we'll give it a go. So perhaps there will be a world where we have the next song camp will be the YouTubers as well. So why not, right? So it can be our writer with YouTubers, and then even with the video creator. So the world is coming into convergence. So anything goes. But that targeted means there is a brief at the end of the day.
Right.
Does that mean we're going to be negotiating another contract together? Please tell me no.
Most certainly.
Double it.
I just want to pick up on the point that you made there, Arica. A great example of very targeted briefs is K-pop. So K-pop at the moment has evolved into a very targeted process, as you say.
That was what I was referring to.
And so the song structure is very set.
Prescriptive, as Adi just said, yes.
Well, you don't mess with successful formula.
Sure, so no one's criticizing it.
Yeah. Whereas, for example, we're looking at some collaborations, as I mentioned, between our Indian partners, Times, and our US company. That will be a little more, magic in the room scenario where we bring somebody over, they're working with different artists, and we see what catches and what works.
Yeah, and I think we've been talking a lot about the creative process, but let's not forget it's still a human versus a human. It is the human connection.
Yes.
So they know each other, they know how each other's music sound like. So the music the magic doesn't really end when they parted ways because it continues, because the relationship will be there and they can continue. So sometimes it can give fruits to a very magical moment, a sound that I'm like, what? Where did it come from? A year later.
Right.
So it's the human connection, just like we are connected here. So yeah, it's all good.
This is why songwriting is so important.
Yes.
It is literally the heart of
Sure.
of the music that we
Sure.
listen to, and all of this is
Absolutely.
happening sometimes behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I do want to give you each one sentence advice to songwriters, if you can, in one sentence. What advice would you give to aspiring songwriters?
Write your song, and then do not give up, because the music that is not heard is not a song, it is aspiration. So write and make sure that it's being heard. If no one hear you, write again and sing again until you're heard.
Great.
yeah, I think something similar. All the songwriters that I've had the honor of working with over the years, the best ones are the ones that don't give up. They don't have success, so they keep trying, they collaborate, they try different things. They've just got something in them
Right.
that needs to be expressed.
And then that number one hit.
Yeah, and you've just got to keep going.
Right. David?
Agree your splits before release.
Very, very business advice. Thank you so much. Please, a great round of applause for my wonderful panel.